In this module, we are going to be configuring an instance or launching an instance with user data. So previously, we were able to launch two instances. We have our Devops with mic, dev, and prod server. We did configure these instances and we're able to connect to the server. If you come here, we're able to connect to the Devops with mic, prod server. Now, in this other use case, we are going to be creating a server with some form of user data. Now, what is a user data? User data is some form of configuration that you can use to easily spin up an instance with those commands running. So let's just search, for example, AWS, or you can just say user data example for EC2. You can type user data example. So they say run commands when you launch your EC2 instance. To know more about user data, if you click on this documentation, the link is in the description. Run commands when you launch your instance. So at the time when you're launching your instance, a user data will help you to automatically run some commands. So they say specify instance user data at launch with the launch wizard. So you can put the commands here. This is more information as far as user data is concerned. If you scroll down, they say how Amazon handles user data. This is more information on how AWS handles user data. So user data is basically a collection of shell scripts. So let's scroll down. This is an example of a user data. You can pass this as user data, some form of commands that you want to execute. So they say user data and AWS CLI. This is an example of a user data. The user data is echo user data. And then this is another example of a user data, bin bash, sudo update, service, http start, checkoff, config this. So this is an example to modify the user data of a stop instance. So basically, you can use this user data to spin up an instance and execute the commands on launching an instance. So they say, let's go ahead basically to try to run an instance with the user data. So let me click on this. No, we are going to use this instance user data. The instance user data is this bin bash, and then you give the name sudo yum-y, and then it's to service http start and check off httpd on. So I'll copy this user data here. I'll come back to my AWS. I'll select launch instance. I'll click on launch instances. And when I click on launch instances, I'll say Devops with mic. I'll give the instance the name Devops with mic dash stage server. This one will call this server the Devops with mic stage server. And once I do Devops with mic stage server, I'll allow it as the Amazon Linux 2023. I'll allow the instance type t2.micro. I'll select my key pair to be Devops with mic key pair. And then under network settings, I'll click on edit network settings. And then I'll change the VPC to the prod VPC, allow the subnet to the prod public subnet, and then equally I'll enable auto assign public IP, so I can have a public IP of this instance. And then after that, I'll select the existing security group. I'll choose my security group, the Devops in my instance SG, which we created. I'll select the Devops in my instance SG, and then I'll scroll down. Now I'll click on advanced details. When I click on advanced details, I will be able to add or paste the user data. So I'll just right click here and I'll paste this user data. So again, I copy this user data from the AWS documentation of user data, and then I come when I'm launching the instance, the user data I put here. So equally, for you to run these commands with privilege, you can see do sudo yum update. So you can do sudo yum update, then you can do sudo service http start, you can do sudo check config http on, that's to install Apache web server. Then you can do to install git, you can do sudo yum install git -y. So this will automatically install Apache web server or start the Apache web server, and then this should equally install git on the server. So rather than you logging into the server like we did previously, we're able to SSH into the server before we could install git. Rather than you logging into the server manually, to do that, you can do all the configurations using a user data. So with the help of this user data, if you launch the instance, let me take a quick summary. We just give the instance the name, selected Amazon Linux T2 micro. For the key pair, we use the Devops with mic key pair, and then we use the Devops with mic prod VPC, Devops with mic prod subnet. We auto assign public IP enabled, and then for the user data, we make use of this user data. So this is basically a summary of the steps which you've done. So once you have these steps here, you just need to click on launch instance. So you'll be launching those instance, or you'll be launching this instance with those configurations. So the instance has been launched. We can click here to see the instance. It opens the instance in a new tab. We are now going to have the instance here. We have instance ID, the instance name Devops in Mike stage server, and the instance is running, is currently initializing. If you cancel this filter, you'll see we have the prod server which you created without the user data, the dev server which you created without the user data, and now we are creating the stage server with a user data. So I'll untick this and I'll click on Devops in Mike stage server. Once I click Devops in Mike stage server, I can connect to the server. I can type here, I'll click on connect. I can use SSH instance connect to connect to this server. I can copy this, come back to this previous tab. I'll exit here. I'll type exit so I can have access to this terminal. My terminal session has expired, so I'll have to open a new tab. I'll click on shell. I'll open a new tab. So I'll open a new tab, and this new tab takes me back to my parent directory, which was my downloads. If you do pwd, I'm in my downloads where my key pair is currently found. Once I'm in this directory, I'll run the command. Again, I'll copy this command to SSH. I'm using SSH client. I'll copy this command to SSH. If you take note, I'm connecting to the stage server. Copy this command to SSH, come back to the stage server, right click, and I'll paste. When I right click and I paste and I hit enter, they'll ask, are you sure you want to connect to the server? I'll take yes. And now when I take yes, I'll get into the server. Now when I get into the server, by default, if I do git -- version, I should be able to see git has been installed by default without me running the git command, because if you come to the instance, by the time I was creating this instance, I used a user data that enabled me to install git. If you come to instance connect here, copy this instance public IP and you paste the instance public IP, you should be able to see the Apache. So you can click on continue to site. The instance is currently running. Let's see if the instance is initialized. Let's come back to the instance here. You can scroll up or we click on instances and let's see if the stage server has passed 2 on 2 check. If you refresh, Apache was not installed, but if you come back to the instance, git was installed. So for you to ensure that your installation is proper, you must make sure you're having the right installation user data. Now basically user data contains just Linux commands, so it's just a combination of Linux commands that you want to execute on the launch of your EC2 instance. Now we are done with all the user data, SSH and the instance types, so we are going to delete all of these instances. So I'll select all instances. I'll select the dev server, select the prod server, and equally the stage server. When I select the 3 servers, I'll click on instance state here, and under instance state I could stop the instances if I wanted to use them subsequently, but because I don't want to use them subsequently, I'll just click on terminate or delete. So to delete an instance, the AWS word to delete an instance is what we call terminate. If I click on terminate here, they'll ask me, are you sure you want to delete all 3 instances? On EBS, they say on an EBS backed, the default action for root EBS volume diseases. So what we are going to do is I'll click on terminate. So when I click on terminate, you see successfully initiated termination or deletion of the 3 instances. And if you can see here, you see the instances are currently shutting down. It's currently shutting down those instances. If I refresh, you will see the instances are shutting down, meaning even on a session like this, it automatically closed the remote session because the instance has been closed on the AWS console side. If you refresh now again, you will see that the prod server has been terminated. It's currently shutting down the dev server, as well as it's currently shutting down the stage server. Again, if you click, you should be able to see, I think if you give it some few minutes, it's terminating or deleting those instances. If you refresh again, you should be able to see now that okay, the dev server has been terminated, and then now the stage server is currently shutting down pending termination. You refresh, let's give it a few minutes again. So first, the prod server has been terminated, the dev server has been terminated, and now if you see, the stage server has been terminated. So we've successfully terminated or deleted all those 3 instances, meaning we are not going to be billed by AWS for having any of those instances running. So in our next module, we are going to be creating an auto scaling group. We'll come to auto scaling groups. We are going to be creating an auto scaling group, and then we'll look at load balancers. We're going to create auto scaling group. We see we do not have any auto scaling group. We're going to create auto scaling group, as well as we'll look at load balancers.